welcome to week 4. But it is Monday, so at the very least, I did half of my job with the beginning. So turn on that as well. So kind of just hit our agenda. So get a pulse on everything with the discussion posts. So I thought everyone was having really, really awesome dialogue. I'm not a mindless person in the sense that I just want to hear positive feedback from you guys. I would rather hear what is actually going on. But I think when I hear you guys being able to work through some of those week 1 and week 2 challenges with SimNet, and having like a better plan for your workflow, that is what makes me happy. So it's not like I want you guys to be like, oh, it's all rainbows and everything else. It's like, no, I do not want you guys to lie to me. But I also am very pleased that it sounds like people are at least getting into the swing of things and have a good plan. I think that's going to lead to people being successful and being able to have kind of the maximum takeaway from that. So with that caveat being said, please feel free to communicate openly with each other or with me. And if there's something that comes up, there have been a couple of students that have sent, and in this class and other sections as well, that have had different issues with a couple of them with SimPaths, a couple of them with the projects and stuff like that. Feel free to email me, and I'm happy to look into it. With a SimNet content related issue, I recommend emailing the BA325 email, just because both Nicole and I monitor that one. And so you'll probably get a little bit of a faster turnaround, because sometimes those questions do take a little bit longer in terms of like me figuring out where the issue was. And I really do take those seriously for your guys' learning, in the sense that like, I want to make sure that whether you were right and SimNet was being stupid, whether you were wrong, but you kind of knew what was going on and it was just like a human error, or whether you were wrong and didn't know, I would like both of us to walk away from that with you now knowing, and also you getting the points that you deserve based on your knowledge. So if there was an issue, I'd like to resolve that and make sure that you have points commensurate with your knowledge. But I'd also more appropriately like it to not be something that you would be confused on going forward. So I do take that seriously. And so it does take a little bit of time for me to look into it and kind of figure out. So if you send it to the BA325 at PDX, either Nicole or I will be able to answer it, where if you send it to just me, it's just me. Either way is fine, but just know what sort of time frame turnaround you're playing with. Also, it was really cool to hear so many different pieces of the discussion. It sounded like everyone was at the very least interested in network effects, whether or not, I mean, some people had different takes on it, right? But I think it seems like everyone recognizes the benefit that they present to businesses. Whether they are a benefit to us as consumers is a different, I mean, like, it's different in the sense that obviously by definition it is beneficial to us because you get more value, and value is a thing. But from the other standpoint, welcome, Megan. But so from the other standpoint, the question about long-term benefit, if there's a competitive imbalance, that is something that you know, I think is a relevant thing to ask. So I think a lot of people went a lot of different directions, and it was cool to see that. And hopefully you guys also from last week could kind of see where the first 2 weeks, which maybe were a little bit more dry. I mean, I know when you set the stage, oftentimes it is a little bit more dry, but there were different kind of definitional pieces and background pieces that built into kind of what we ended up discussing with network effects. So, but I was really, really impressed and really happy with everyone's posts with that. So real quick, SimNet check-in. So we had said last week that the goal for you guys, just to stay on track, and I know people are getting into the swing of things, is being done with the sim paths, having at least started on the projects, maybe done with the projects if you're kind of really on track. So I'm not trying to belabor the point. I'm just trying to let you guys know. The exams, exam 1 and exam 2, and the ones for access as well, are going to be structured similarly to the sim paths. Gesundheit. In the sense that it's the web-based interface. Like from an interface standpoint, it will operate just like the sim paths for you, the pre-tests or the post-tests within the sim paths. You will not be given the answers, but you will get 2 attempts per question. So just in terms of you guys kind of planning, structuring your head, how am I going to be doing this and everything else? The practice exams I highly recommend. They are optional, but I highly recommend, because then you get a sense of, am I in a good place, or should I do the lesson/study before doing the graded exam? Yeah. I'm trying to be good about repeating things just for people. So the question was whether we get multiple attempts on each exam to go through the whole thing. And the answer is you get 1 attempt on the practice exam. You get 1 attempt on the graded exam. I'm not against giving you guys more attempts on the practice exam if you want. I mean, if that was something you really wanted to do, I'm comfortable with it. But I created the lesson, the study lesson for the exam, where it is literally all of the lessons from all of the relevant SimPath content that is going to be covered on that exam. So what I would say is, rather than, and I mean, again, I'm open, right? But rather than doing multiple practice exams, which may or may not prepare you, I would be an advocate of doing the practice exam. And then if you feel like I'm really happy with my results, then take the graded exam. And if you're not, then you can do whatever parts of that lesson you feel are necessary to get you up and running. The lesson does not auto curate the content for you, right? So it is all of them no matter what. And so you have to self-filter, which, I mean, exactly. But I'm just saying, like, just for workflow and everything else. So I would say that that is a better way of you kind of preparing and going about it. But like I said, I'm totally open if people wanted to do multiple graded, or I mean, multiple of the practice exams. I just honestly feel like that's not the best use of your guys' studying time. So, but if someone specifically wanted to, let me know. We can make it happen. So all I would say with this, from a reminder sense and everything else, is make sure you guys have a plan. Part of the reason why I actually had set up the SimNet schedule to be a little bit more on the aggressive side of things was because I really wanted you guys to have a full week to focus on exam 1 and a full week to focus on exam 2, mostly because they represent the larger percentage of your grade within the scope of the SimNet content, right? Each exam represents 5% of your endpoint grade, right? So that was more just to set you guys up to not have to feel rushed on something that has a greater impact. But I will say that if you have spent a thorough time in the SimPaths and likewise in the projects, the exams are not as challenging because you've spent the time on the front end getting comfortable with the interface and getting comfortable with the content. So just make sure that you have a plan. That's all. So today's learning objectives we'll cover. So the lecture today is kind of 2 parts. So one is a discussion of data as a corporate resource. So a lot of what we talked about in week 2, and a little bit week 1, but definitely week 2 and week 3 really link into this. So obviously, if a company is trying to create a network effect, they need to have a data collection plan and how they're going to process it and how they're going to leverage it and how they're going to utilize it. So, and especially when you talk about a lot of tech forward companies, in a lot of ways, the data that they have is their greatest asset, like more than anything else. The data that Uber has on traffic patterns and usage and everything else, that is the most valuable thing that they have. So this is something that's very, very crucial. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about, let's say, like databases in theory and data modeling in theory. We're not going to go super in depth because this is a new concept to a lot of people. It's very important, and it touches on us and our lives both personally and professionally in ways that was surprising to me, in the sense that, like, if you had asked me before I started studying information technology and lecturing on it and things like that, I would have been like, yeah, databases are a thing. And I wouldn't have really thought about how I interact with databases all the time. But like literally, Facebook is just a database with a graphical user interface that we play with. But like all of the stuff that we're doing, it's just like a pretty picture for us to see. And what's going on is a database on the background. So pretty much everything is a database in some way, shape, or form, at least online and things like that, because it's just an efficient way of storing and connecting data. So this is highly relevant because in any of your careers, doesn't matter which directionality of business you take, you will interact with these in some way, shape, or form. It's unlikely that anyone in this room will be like a database administrator. But depending on how tech forward or not may depend on how deep into interacting with the databases you get. But at the very least, you'll be querying stuff. You'll be pulling data and using it. So this is something that we'll probably spend at least 2, maybe 3 weeks kind of discussing and going in much more in depth than just today. But we're going to intro it today. And then wrap up and questions. So that's kind of the direction that we're going for today. So this might be just the cutest little thing. This is real. This isn't even a stuffed animal. But like German Shepherd and Golden Retriever mix. Whoever decided, right? Whoever decided to play like Dog God and just like start like Island of Dr. Moreau style crossing things, like this was an acceptable output from that. Yeah? You know, I'm going to have to look into that. I don't know. I'll ask my friend who's a vet. I'm hopeful. Like now that you asked that, I am so hopeful. And even, how's this? Even if not, cloning's a thing now. We don't even need it to be able to reproduce for us to be able to have more of it. But very good question. So learning objectives for today. The top ones, we kind of actually hammer home pretty much every week, but think critically about information technology. Be able to link information system terminology and concepts to the big picture. I'm going to try to make sure that we're always thinking about applications and big picture views on anything that we discuss. So critically analyze, that kind of goes into it. We will talk about data privacy a little bit today. Certainly data as a corporate resource and system development. The system development definitely links to data as a corporate resource, because if you think about it, kind of root cause sort of thing, the systems that you have are going to determine what data you can possibly collect or store or not. And so, these two things definitely link together and support each other. And then finally, we will talk about data sets a little bit and talk about data models some. So that's kind of our agenda for today. Any questions before we jump into the water? Okay. So, I did have one thing I wanted to say. All of the information literacy week or assignment 1 grades have been posted. Class average was high B, low A. So people did very, very well. And I'll have an announcement that has a little bit more information on details. All of the feedback is in D2L. If you want to see it, you can go to the assignment tab itself, and you can click on it, and it has both your grade and it has your feedback. The feedback should kind of align with what my, after you guys turned it in, kind of explanation video. So that should be pretty clear, hopefully. But obviously, if you have questions, reach out. I would say the biggest place that people missed points, kind of on a larger global scale, would be being able to relate what you did, either in the data exhaust or the Google search, back to course concepts or course terms, right? So you always want to think about, like, why are you doing it, right? Like, your experience, right? If you go off the grid and all of that, that's awesome. But how do you link that back to this class in general, and or how do you link it back to the course concepts? So making sure that you're doing that. And then also making sure when you're using like a definitional term, that you both effectively use it, and there weren't really many errors on that, but also that you intro it appropriately, right? Like, it's fine that you guys know that I know what data exhaust means, because obviously I assigned the assignment and all of those other pieces, but you're not doing a great job of supporting your whole discussion if you do not either define it or introduce it well. And one thing that I will tell you, as much as it sounds silly, I've had plenty of bosses that had me work on projects that were like 6-month or year projects, and we had like weekly and monthly check-ins about how things were going. And when I did like a report out, I had to remind them on very low level fundamental things that had gone on in the project. So like, your audience may not devote the time and attention that you did to that assignment or whatever else. So it is a good thing to learn, just to make sure that it's like, okay, this is this. So one example I would say is in the Google search assignment, one of the main references that people used obviously was the filter bubble talk. And it's fine to say, I watched the TED talk on filter bubbles. Great. But even one sentence or a partial sentence that uses the description of what you're interpreting filter bubble to be supports your competency and understanding on that subject. Because also there's the possibility that like Samvel and I may have a slightly different interpretation of what filter bubble means, right? And so if you're using a term and you have not established what it means to you, you're going off the assumption that you and your audience have the exact same interpretation. And even when it's something factual, that's not always the case. So it's just an important thing. There wasn't a huge deduction for that. So, but it is something that I would want you guys to focus on. So, but all of that being said, everyone's feedback is posted for this section, and I'll have everything else posted later today for the other sections. Yeah? Yeah, so the question is basically make sure that things are explained. And I would say, I mean, yes, but it's not like explain like I'm dumb or you're dumb or anything else, but it's more like there are a lot of those terms that will mean something slightly different to different people. And so it's important that you explain what it means to you and how you're using it. And that also ends up supporting your argument, right? It supports the point that you're making. So yeah, so, and it doesn't have to like, I am not saying you need to have like a full paragraph showing like, I have researched into this term, just, use the course terms and course concepts and make sure that you're declaring what it means to you and how you're using it, and then go with it. So maybe a sentence, maybe two, kind of depending on how many course terms you're using, but yeah, and that will not be terribly relevant for the pivot table assignment, which is due this week, and it will not be terribly relevant to the last information literacy assignment. the database assignment, because that will have a similar structure to the pivot table assignment. So I would say what we're discussing right now is most relevant in the Excel analysis assignment, which is the one that's due in week 6. So, but very, very good question. So yes. Okay, so first things, transaction processing system. So you want to think about like, how does a corporation, how does an enterprise collect the data that they want to use, right? Like they have, I mean, we know that they have a bunch of data. We know that they're collecting data on us. One of the main ways that they have been collecting data for some time, and this actually goes back to, hell, I mean, certainly back to the 80s, is a transaction processing system. So a transaction processing system record some sort of transaction, right? So a POS is a transaction processing system. So cash register stale, ATM, product return. So anything that's happening at like a register in some way, shape, or form, unless it's like one of those old cash registers that are just ridiculous. Another thing would be like Square would be a transaction processing system. So there are tons of different ways that we experience that and see that. And just to take a step backwards, when we talk about transactions, this is a little bit economic style, but a transaction is any kind of exchange of value. So we generally think of a transaction in the sense that it's like, I want to buy something from you, you give me a service. There is a cash-related, quote, transaction. And that's by and large what we're talking about. But remember that this is true because there are other places where it might be just like a trade-related exchange. And it doesn't have to have cash as the intermediate of supporting the transaction. So kind of the next level of things that allow you to, as an enterprise, to gather data, right? So again, you want to work backwards from the standpoint of a company wants to have as much data as possible, and they want that because if they have more and more data, they can then try to leverage it to make better decisions. So a corporation wants as much data as possible that is good and relevant. And that second part is very, very important. But so all of these are systems that different enterprises use to facilitate the gathering of that data. So some of these terms were on the data analytics figure from the first week. But ERP is enterprise resource planning, CRM is customer resource management, and SCM is supply chain management. So like I said, different firms, businesses, they set up these things to gather additional data. And we'll actually talk about, there's an interesting thing that has really gone on with cloud computing becoming so much more of the way that even enterprises do different things, where most ERPs and CRMs are actually, maybe not all, but certainly a majority are actually third party. So like Salesforce is the most well-known CRM that's out there. And rather than a company building their own CRM, which is kind of a pain in the butt, and if you're not a software company, why would you spend your resources building something that you're not necessarily good at, right? So instead, Salesforce is able to have like kind of a modular CRM that they can just give and sell to different companies, and then they can use. So a lot of these enterprise softwares are actually now things that most companies use through a third party. So ERP, it integrates operational business functions. So a lot of that is for the internal planning. So enterprise, and then The resource is just talking about their internal resources. So how do they allocate their internal resources? How do they know where they're going? How do they have internal metrics and know how things? So a lot of ERP is going to line up with a lot of kind of managerial accounting principles and things like that. How do you take your internal resource assets, everything else, labor, all of those things, and how do you make sure that they are oriented towards your output, right? Whatever your output is. CRM, customer relationship management. So it tracks data of customer contact. So this could be as simple as storing customer information, right? Email, phone number, all of that. Possibly having a way of documenting any sort of issues with a customer, right? Like if, you know, like say Amazon, for example, you have an issue and certainly the issue you have and what vendor was the issue and what caused the issue. Was it, you know, I don't know, delivery miscue or something else? Like that's going to be stored. And, you know, think about it. If you're a customer that has consistently had a problem with a company and they at least acknowledge that you have had a series of things, you're going to feel more heard, right? I got into a not so friendly discussion with a customer service rep yesterday because I had gotten like, my dog really likes to destroy her toys. And so I had gotten like the super robust dog toys. Like there's a couple of websites that do like the you can't destroy it dog toy. And when I signed up for a 3-month and that's it sort of trial. And after I had signed up, they set it to reoccurring, even though I had specifically not set it to reoccurring. So on Saturday, I had a random bill that I was like, well, that shouldn't happen. And I have all of the emails that document the fact that I had talked with them initially saying, I do not want this to reoccur. And then this customer service rep was like, well, you should look at our facts. So that clearly that conversation didn't go so well. But, you know, just going back to this, like, I'm certainly going to be talking to them again. And I'm certainly going to be talking to my credit card if they are not willing to recover those things. But they should have all of the customer notes from me because there's no way that they're going to be able to recover that situation if they don't at least address the fact that they screwed up. Like, we're all human. I'm fine with people screwed up, but like if you make a mistake, just fix it, right? And so also when I was starting the blockchain certificate at Portland State and kind of communicating all the information requests, we stored all of my advising notes with every person. And I probably advised about 150 people over the course of a couple of months. So I had all of their questions, right? I had all of my answers stored. I had all of their information. So as the certificate was getting closer and closer to launch, we could just take whatever population within the CRM was still interested after the advising phone call, and then we could push out information to them, right? But imagine trying to structure that if we didn't have something like that, where it's like, wait a minute, did I talk to Glenn 3 months ago, and was he still interested after we talked, or was he like only interested before we talked and then he wasn't afterwards? Like, I'm not so sure that many of us are going to have that sort of recall. So having something that stores it in an efficient way, and then also more importantly, links to other parts of the enterprise, right? So your CRM is basically a customer database, but then you can link it with other parts of things so that way it eliminates some of the friction. And then SCM is it's similar to enterprise resource management, but it's targeted at operations and the value chain. So, for example, obviously Nike is not a manufacturing company. They're a design company, but their supply chain is very broad because they have other people do their manufacturing. So an SCM for them would be managing all of the touch points from the very acquisition of goods that are then going to be funneled into creating different parts and then creating the actual products and then getting the products to where they're being sold. So that would be much more targeted at the specific steps in the value chain, and then making sure all of those things are organized. So all of these different pieces are things that companies use to manage different aspects of their business. But more importantly, if your business has any of these bullet points, you would like it to be as efficient as possible, right? You would like it to be as effective as possible. So anytime you're having these systems, you also want to be collecting data on what's going on in every part that it touches, so that that way you can interpret it. So that way you can try to make sure it's better in the future. So this is the slide from the first week. And I have this more just because we have ERP, CRM, and SCM. And so if you look, this inner shell of ERP doesn't really have a ton of data involved. And so these are the things that you're collecting within an ERP. So you're collecting purchase-related stuff, payment-related stuff. So again, talking about accounting, right? Either managerial accounting or financial accounting, kind of depending. And then with a CRM, you're talking about collecting segment data, right? So like you probably want to know if someone is a college student versus not a college student. You might send different things to them. You might send different notifications to them. Like if your target, if someone has kids, you might send them certain things. If they don't have kids, you might send them different things. Like if you send me dog-related things, I'm probably interested. If someone hates dogs, they probably aren't so interested in getting dog-related advertising. So knowing what your customer is, who they are, what they're interested in, how you contact them, how you kind of, have touch points with them, that's all very, very relevant. Web is definitely different than SCM, but for the purpose of our discussion, SCM is the next level past CRM and does involve more touch points where you can collect data. But so just trying to illustrate that as you increase up that curve, it's not just that you are storing more data, like gigabytes versus terabytes versus megabytes. It's also that you have more types of data that you're collecting. And you're trying to leverage those things to be able to make better decisions. So this is kind of the generalized information system cycle. So we've got a lot of different things going on, but basically what this is trying to showcase is what is a company trying to do and what is a very, very generalized workflow process that is happening. So for this, we kind of start in the bottom left. So handling the present. So TPS is transaction processing system and ES is enterprise system. And so right now, we have those systems in place. And through the scope of doing our business and everything else, we are going to collect data on transactions. And so that is going to help us go to that top piece, which it's called remembering the past, which is, not technically wrong because it's past. But basically what we're doing here is we're dumping this data into some sort of database. Data repository, sometimes it's called data warehouses, sometimes it's called data lakes. There's people love having terms that describe larger and larger databases, but basically it's just a database, right? So basically you gather this data from these transactions, but then you can't do anything with it if it's not in some sort of consistent and consolidated place. So that's one of the main points of a database. So you have it kind of dump there, which is great. And then at this point, you're pulling it out. So at this data stage, it's extracting the data and doing preliminary analysis. So when you talk about extracting the data in this scope of this discussion, what we're saying is taking the data that is relevant to the questions that you're asking, relevant to your decision making, and so on and so forth from that database. So you can have a ton of data that's stored on transactions, on an enterprise system, on a CRM, and you can have, like, you can only care about 20% of it or less for the specific question that you're looking at, or questions. And that's also one of the other really important things about databases is they store data in a very efficient fashion, but they also store data in a way that makes it very easy for you to get the specific data that you want, and only that data from the larger set, right? So it makes it easy on you where you can get what you need. So this data stage is basically saying extracting the data that you want and kind of performing that preliminary analysis on the questions you have, right? And then, so preparing for the future is really doing the like detailed analysis. And one of the things that's not really shown on this figure is a lot of the preliminary analysis with data analysis as a whole is actually called pre-processing and data cleaning. And it actually isn't what you would traditionally think of as data analysis. So it's not like crunching the numbers or other things. It's making sure that your data makes sense. It's making sure that like things are set to agree with each other. So for example, let's say Glenn sets up one database that our company is working with, and he has the dates stored in a certain format, right? And let's say I have the dates stored in a different format, and then Carter has them stored in yet a third format, right? And then you are sitting there trying to go and pull all of the data from those three databases. But the problem is you're going to have three different columns that represent dates in three different formats, right? So when you talk about pre-processing, it's basically getting it so everything kind of agrees where appropriate. So it's making sure that everything is formatted consistently. It's making sure that all of the sources of your data that you are pulling from are going to interact together in a coherent fashion. And when you talk about data cleaning, there's a lot of ways where a poorly set up database can make your life miserable. And so basically what happens with that, and we'll go into more detail of that down the line, but if the person who creates the database doesn't have the right guardrails of what can go into the database and how it has to be structured, there can be missing data. So I believe I mentioned that as one of the projects I was working on at Daimler, where this database for travel data, one of the questions they wanted me to answer was how many international flights versus domestic flights were going on, right? And obviously one of the big pieces with that is it being a German company, the international flights are like 5 to 10 times more expensive than the domestic flights. And so being able to minimize those flights and also possibly transition those from like business class to coach or economy or whatever else is going to have some real value, like bottom line money value for the company. And the problem is the third-party database we were using, which is a company called SAP, and their service was SAP Concur. No one had set it up where you had to put your to and from or your cabin code. So you could buy a plane ticket, and you didn't have to say that you were leaving from Portland. And actually, to make it slightly more relevant to us, there was a different database where you had to have all your plane information. But in SAP Concur, which is how we tracked internal spending, you didn't have to enter it in there. So you could have a flight that left Portland and went to Stuttgart, and you flew first class because you're just big ballin', and you spent, you know, $18,000 on a flight that could have been $1,200. And the only thing that we knew is you flew somewhere in the world and it cost a lot of money. And we had no reason why or anything else. So we had no visibility on it, right? And so that is figuring that out and trying to possibly find that data if it's possible to find, or at least, you know, determine that you can't answer the question, right? Because you can't answer the question if you don't have the data. So basically because of how that database was poorly constructed, or at least set, we only had 10% of the flight information consistently. So we knew that people were flying, and that's it, right? So we didn't have the ability to answer some of those questions. But this part of data analysis is actually probably like 70% of data analysis, actually. Similar to like if you talk to someone who's a good writer, and I'm not, so take it with a grain of salt, but they will say that 70% of the time that you should spend writing is either planning and outlining or revising. And so data analysis is a similar sort of thing in the sense that you want to get it so everything is consistent, everything makes sense, you know what the data is telling you, it all agrees, so there aren't any big like red flags or question marks, and then you can dump it into kind of preparing for the future and doing some real analysis. So this, to a large degree, is where we talk about data visualization. So preparing for the future, if you think about it in any business field, you can think of forecasting as something that is relevant no matter what. And all forecasting is predicting what is coming, right? And so one of the best ways that you can quote unquote predict what is coming is being able to show trend over time, right? And so being able to take all of this data and not answer a static question, but be able to put it into an analytical toolbox that allows you to see like, okay, this is what's happening right now, but also for airline related spending for Daimler or whatever else, okay, we see this ebb and flow over the course of the year because there's certain higher level of travel based on supporting different events, right? Supporting quarter close sort of things, whatever that is, right? But you see this kind of fluctuation, and that's going to happen for any business. Well, that's great, but how do we prepare for the future, predict the future? What if we know that there's a downturn in our business and we need to make adjustments accordingly? Well, if we see some sort of curve that looks like that, and we see that we're maybe 5% above that curve right now, we know that not only do we need to get back in line, but go below it because there's been a downturn, right? And so preparing for the future with these analytical tools is being able to take kind of all of the past trends that we can incorporate from that data, and then also see where we're currently at and where we're trying to go, right? And that could be cost savings, that could be increasing sales revenue. It could be increasing number of customers, right? If you were like a digital company, it could just be like monthly active customers. If you're like Facebook or something else, it's less about the number of users, but it's more about the number of like active monthly users, I think is what most social media companies look at. So it doesn't necessarily matter. It's the questions can change, but really what we're always trying to do is effectively evaluate what the current trend is and make some predictions of what will happen in the future or what we should be doing to support our success in the future. And then kind of this last piece is new opportunities. So new opportunities, obviously, if you're looking at this and you do that analysis, one opportunity that I found for Daimler was talk to SAP Concur and make people do just 2 little things, which is very easy to do on the database side of things. And then you can actually analyze the most important question we could not answer because someone didn't check 2 boxes. So that's an opportunity for them to do that. But there were a couple of other things that were like, where is cost savings? Where is this? Could we be more efficient with these things? Or should we invest in a different area, right? From a supply chain standpoint, one of the things that's very interesting when you talk about like logistics is, do you need another distribution center, right? Starting up a large distribution center is going to be very expensive no matter how you slice it, right? There's all those different pieces that are involved, but does that mean that you can get something to a customer with a shorter turnaround? Or does it mean you can get something to a customer by paying less transit cost each time, right? Does it mean that you can minimize having to fly stuff or overnight stuff if something happens? And something always will happen. So, you know, if you were to perhaps look at analyzing what downtime is, like what metrics do you have and what do you need to support? But those can all play into what opportunities you can target. And then obviously it just kind of loops in a never-ending cycle. And so I just call that out, that it's kind of, that's always your starting point. That's always your position 0. And then you come back and you reset. So it might even be, in the Daimler example that I gave, it might be coming all the way down, figuring out that you needed to have certain things change with SAP Concur. That's it, right? And have that as some of the things that you're doing, and then just start collecting your new and more accurate data. You know, you probably would need at least 1 year of data to start seeing a trend and being able to infer certain things, and maybe use it to kind of see what was going on in the past and make some tentative logical jumps. But you can take whatever those new opportunities are and change the business focus and create a, quote, new present, and then kind of continue to iterate. So the important thing for any company is they're kind of like the hungry hippos of data. They want more data all the time, but they want it to be good data. They don't want to eat that garbage data. And so one of the ways that they can get more data are surveys. Now, just as a quick question, how many people actually do surveys? Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. OK, so we got 2, 3, 4, 5. Surveys that are sent to us. Okay, no. I'm just. So here's the question: when you fill out surveys, are you filling them out just like no matter what, or do you fill them out like when you have a particularly good experience or a particularly bad experience? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's actually something interesting called Net Promoter Score that relates to the fact that we psychologically are more inclined to speak out when we have a crappy experience. You know, guilty. That's actually the reason why, because I was in customer service for so long, like I really try to actually go out of my way to fill out a survey when I have a good experience, because we so often don't get good, like positive feedback in a professional setting. But I think that is very, I mean, I have to push myself not to do only that. But so surveys are one thing that you can do. How many marketing majors do we have? Cool, got 2, 3, okay, couple, good. So I mean, survey data is probably your bread and butter in a lot of places, right? Is that fair? So one of the things that's very interesting about survey data is it creates some interesting data quality issues. And the reason why that is like sentences are really hard to analyze. Right? Like if I say like, why was your experience good? And then you write me this wonderful paragraph that tells me all these things, but what if I have 50,000 people that filled it out, right? Like I do not have the kind of time to read 50,000 paragraphs and make sense of it, right? And so surveys are very valuable to get touch points from the customer, but you really have to know like what you're trying to get answers to, and you have to structure it in a thoughtful way to be able to get data that is actionable. So CRM products, so a lot of CRM products, again, customer resource management. So their whole point is handling every one of the customer touch points. And obviously surveys or customer feedback would be a very real way that happens, right? So so that's another piece that you can do. Some of them might just be like email surveys. I think we've all seen those. The way that we were using Salesforce also had like if if you were requesting a advising appointment with me, you had to list a certain set of reasons why you were looking for the advising appointment, so that way I knew what questions you had going into it. And then after you closed out that advising appointment, after you attended, it kind of sent you something just to make sure that you had any feedback, if you had any follow-up questions or whatever else, and then I would reach out to them to make sure. But so this is another place where you can gather more customer-facing data. So there's also external sources. We talked about them a little bit briefly, and we're going to talk about them a little bit more today, and also share one of the most interesting and terrifying things I learned over the weekend. It's great. It's like literally like I don't even seek out stories and articles and podcasts that are like highly relevant to the class. It's like they just like come into my life. But oh man, it was interesting. So organizations purchase their data to supplement. So that's data brokers, right? So if an organization wants data, they are going to try to collect as much data as possible. But if they can't collect the type of data that they would like or they would need, they can get it from somewhere else. And so business to business organizations often have a data sharing related kind of agreement. So one of the things that's actually very interesting when you look into all of the different ways that Amazon Marketplace works. So Amazon makes this great marketplace that's awesome for us for customers. And then there's a bunch of third-party entities that sell stuff on there. So that's great, except for the fact that because those third-party businesses are selling stuff on Amazon's marketplace, Amazon keeps all the data. Like Amazon lets the company have the data as well, but Amazon keeps all the data. It's their data, right? And then Amazon uses that data however the hell they want, which means like you could be like, actually Birkenstocks was a company that had a lawsuit with Amazon, and there's like literally nothing that they can do about it. But basically Birkenstocks was really upset because they got a bunch of customer feedback of having like shoddy products. And basically there was companies that were making counterfeit Birkenstocks and selling them on Amazon Marketplace. But Amazon was like, yeah, whatever. Like, that's not our job to regulate. Which, I mean, that's a different sort of discussion, but let's just humor that that's what happened. But the point was that Amazon wouldn't share the data with Birkenstocks about who was selling these shoddy shoes, right? And then because Birkenstocks was basically like, well, I'm not going to sell on Amazon anymore, right? And so Amazon was like, fine. So Amazon bought 2 years worth of Birkenstocks so they could just sell Birkenstocks on their website. And so it's like, but it's one of those things where it's like, Amazon has all this data, and there are multiple instances where Amazon, in collecting the data off of third-party businesses, has looked and seen a market opportunity for them to start producing that item. They recently started producing like furniture, like I think like kind of IKEA level, like kind of low cost furniture. But it's like part of the reason why they did that was they noticed the same market advantage that they had noticed initially with books, where they just noticed like, oh, there's this huge market demand for furniture of this type and everything else. And they were like, well, we can do it. And we can make it more efficiently because of our economies of scale, and we can sell it, and we can undercut them, and then we will have all the sales, and we will have all the profit, and we are Scrooge McDuck. Yay. And also, like, think about it from this standpoint for the marketers that are in here, right? How long does a product design normally take? Right? Like it goes through multiple iterations, right? Like you have this idea, and that's great. And then you have to like, you know, figure out what it's going to do and all of that, and what customer segments it's going to, you know, hit. And then you have to do like, you know, surveys or, you know, market analysis or all of these other things. And you have all of these iterations before this actual item comes out, right? Well, Amazon, by having all of their data, they know every single item that sells well. Like they literally have done all of their market analysis without having to do anything. They're literally like, oh, these 10 furniture things are the ones that sell the best. And these 5 are the ones that clearly we can produce and reproduce in the most profitable fashion. Cool. You guys have done my $100 million marketing project for me. Thanks. Right? So it's one of those things where Amazon is definitely predatory in how they do this, but most B2B organizations have some sort of data sharing. And that supports both sides of things. You know, think about like Foot Locker. Is Foot Locker still a thing? They are? Yeah? Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, you know, but I mean, you think about Foot Locker from the standpoint of like, so Nike is going to have a ton more data about what's selling, right? Like they're going to have more data about what's selling on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in Europe, or wherever. Like they're going to have so much more data. And so if you're Foot Locker, one of the like scariest things is having a ton of inventory that doesn't sell, right? And so Nike can support you as a business partner by giving you good visibility on what you should have if you're a Foot Locker on the West Coast versus New York, right? And then the Foot Locker can share with Nike the actual customer touch point data, because those shoes are bought in bulk by Foot Locker. And at that point, Nike doesn't have visibility on those things by and large. And so it can be very collaborative. But like I said, with Amazon, it can also be predatory, you know? So, you know, any sort of data and data analysis, I would say you're targeting increased efficiency, cost savings, and getting a market edge. And this one here is really, really important, and is a term that I sadly overuse, but aggregation. So data are gathered from many sources and expressed in a summary form for the purposes of statistical analysis and investigation, so on and so forth. This is crucial to any data analysis. So aggregating your data, but also having context on it. I will tell you that most of the business students that I've interacted with over the course of the last couple of years often marginalize statistics. And I am not here to be like, you should know your statistics like dad mode or anything. But statistics are important for you to have numerical context on your data when it has been aggregated. Because an average is not terribly helpful if you don't know what went into it. And an average is one form of aggregation. So it's just really kind of gathering it together and expressing it in some sort of summary. But this is really, really crucial, because the larger and larger your data sets and the more and more you're playing with, the more aggregation is important for you to be able to understand what the hell is going on. And this also is crucial for data visualization, which is really where modern data analysis is going. So this was a slide that we didn't get a lot of time to talk about in week 1, and it becomes more and more important for what we're talking about now. So we're just going to revisit it. So this is kind of a 3x3 grid that's just talking about types of data and how that data can be used, basically. So along the bottom, it has self-reported, data exhaust, and profiling data. And so they're just saying, is this data we're giving out freely? Is this data that we're giving out somewhat freely by using digital related stuff? Or is this data that someone is collecting on us, right? That we don't even necessarily know about. So then over here, you have what the use of that data is for, right? So if you're a company that's collecting that data or using that data, what is the point? What question are you trying to solve? What are you using it for? So low level would be improve a product or service. So going back to like the customer feedback, maybe about shoes. One of my friends works in the design of like shoes specifically for competitive female runners, right? And so they'll design the shoe and everything else, and then they will pilot them with a couple hundred different like serious runners around the US, and they will gather all sorts of feedback on it specifically to iterate the product before it's going to go to market, right? And that's pretty standard in a variety of different places, but the whole point of the data, whatever they're gathering, whatever they're interpreting, is just to improve whatever they're doing, right? The next level up would be to target customers, right? So maybe if you're looking at customer activity trends, right? You have this new running shoe that's out, and you're trying to target people that have expressed interest in running or running affiliated activities in a certain area. So you might be using that data to reach new people, or even just reach people that are already aware of some of your products, but not that specific product. Or maybe to target them because you have a sale that's going on or something. But you're using the data specifically with an intention at a group for some sort of reason. And then the last level is to sell to other people, right? So you're just collecting the data specifically because you're going to give it to someone else for some reason, right? And so all of these are different, and it's kind of, I realize even when you're looking at this, this can be a little bit weird, especially because I think the color coding isn't great. I wish it was like not all red/orange, but if you look at the examples on the bottom, I think those are the best indicator. So the first example on the bottom is talking about this website Mint. And Mint is a website that basically helps you do like financial planning and budgeting and things like that. And so Mint basically has the left-hand 6 squares. So they are using self-reported data and data exhaust, and they're doing it to improve a product or service, and they're trying to target market, and they're selling it to third parties, okay? But the kind of, let's say, ethical hedge that Mint has is that they are only selling the data to firms that line up with what the service is trying to do. Right? So you're trying to save money, you're trying to budget or whatever else. And so Mint is only going to sell the consumer data that they have to companies that are also trying to do a similar thing. So the next example is Disney, which in their in all of their Disneyland, Disney World, and whatever, Euro Disney and all of those other things, they actually have some really elegant use of technology. And has anyone been to like Disneyland in the last 5 years or so? So did you use like the Disney wristbands and everything else?
I remember using like a credit card type deal at Disney World.
Okay.
Last time I was at Disneyland, they didn't have that.
Okay. So the interesting thing with Disney is they created these wristbands that are linked to, if you stay at like Hotel Disney or whatever the heck it's called, but if you stay on site, it links to your room, it links to everything else. But even if you don't have that, you can also just link it to your payment method. So you can easily pay for anything using your wristband. But also you can set all sorts of different things up within the park where it's like, you can set up what rides you want to go on, and you can actually get notified when the lines are really short. So it's one of those things where it's like, again, this kind of discussion of technology as a tool, and this discussion is technology is not good or bad, it just is, right? So Disney can apply value to you, so now it's convenient, right? So your payment is really, really easy. And you can have the wristbands, like if you have kids and everything else, you can have it set up so that, the payment is, not terribly complicated. And you have all of this information that Disney can push to you that you've expressed interest in. That's awesome. But Disney now gets to collect geo-tracking data on everyone in the park. Disney gets to track spending related data on every geocached point. Disney gets to collect data on what rides are used more frequently at what times based on how many people are active in the park. They can collect stuff like weather is going to impact when different things transpire and everything else. So it's one of those things where you look at the bottom, and so Disney is collecting self-reported data because you're giving away data freely. They're collecting data exhaust because now they're tracking you. They are also getting profiling data because they are definitely going to collect all of that if possible. And their goal is to increase the product or service experience for you, but also target marketing, right? So again, it goes back to this idea of, it's like, yeah, you're getting some really cool stuff, but now they know more about you than you know about you. And then the last one is the everything box, which is consumers expect the most from Facebook, but Facebook is just gathering all your data because they're terrible. But I mean, so think about this. So Facebook and Google represent a vast, vast majority of the advertising revenue that exists on the internet. Yeah. And I mean, like, it's also hard to say because Facebook isn't great about releasing their advertising revenue, and the difference between their total user base and their monthly active users it's always ambiguous. So it's hard to say kind of where it is. But I would say that whatever numbers we hear is conservative. Those numbers are conservative, and it probably is a little bit better, or better. It's higher. But you know, so think about with Facebook, if Facebook's going to make most of their revenue on ads on their platform, they're probably going to freely give all of the data about you to the companies that want to partner with them, because A, that's easy for them. They just get more money, right? But also then it makes it easy for you as a company because now you can target people better, right? But all of that being said, while it may be a great business interaction for you and for Facebook, it's not necessarily great that you have all of the information about me, right? And also, just so we're perfectly clear, we're not talking about in this discussion all of the information that you put on Facebook. We're talking about everything, because Facebook buys data from data brokers that you never put on Facebook, ever, right? Like your entire banking history, I guarantee you Facebook has it, 100%. And you may, if you buy something on Facebook Marketplace, you probably have like a credit card information or something like that. But it's unlikely that you have your credit card information from 10 years ago, right? And they definitely have that. So that's the piece where this profiling data and this selling to third party can kind of be a little bit terrifying, at least, you know, to me. So data brokers, which is kind of what we were just talking about. So they're firms that collect and resell data about consumers to other organizations. And they're also known as information brokers, information resellers, data marketers. Yeah, and I guess I would say the term that's probably most relevant as a secondary term is consumer data analytics firms. So you think about like Cambridge Analytica was obviously a big deal with Facebook, but literally they're just a consumer data analytics firm. So they're a third party, and they take the data of people that they have no relationship with. So almost all of these information brokers, these data brokers, they do not have a business relationship with you. Like you do not have an account with Axiom. You don't. I mean, like they have a bunch of data on you, a bunch, but you have no official relationship with them, right? And so companies like Amazon, companies like Facebook, Google, Netflix, any of those companies, they are actively gathering data on you as a consumer, and there is the transactional component of everything that you do with them. But we kind of understand that. But the companies like Amazon and Facebook are certainly buying data from data brokers so they can get more to target. But also these data brokers have more data than anybody, and you don't have a relationship with them. It's kind of like the credit bureaus on steroids, and like even worse in some ways. So this quote, the FTC stated that companies have more data on us than Facebook and Google. That was 4 years ago. So think about everything in technology accelerates, right? So these companies have even more than they did then, certainly. And so Vermont law, actually Vermont is a very weird thing because it is like a lot of technology related legislation ends up happening in Vermont. Vermont, California, and the EU are like the major players in terms of changing around how data is regulated. And it's actually very interesting because if you think about it, one of the benefits of telecommunication and technology companies is they can cross any border very easily, right? But the problem is if the EU changes something about data privacy and you are Apple and you're located in Silicon Valley, but a third of your customers are in the EU, that means that everything you do has to be compliant with that law. Unless you decide to set up an entire infrastructure just for Europe and none of the European data is ever going to cross, right? Oh, indeed, indeed, indeed. But I mean, like, and let's be real, just pay the European fines is acceptable for a company that's so cash rich as Apple right now. But also think about what a fine represents, right? Like if the speed limit, if exceeding the speed limit was going to be $1 fine, and then everyone was like, oh, hell, I'll just speed, right? At a certain point, they're going to continue to elevate the fine for it to become a barrier because they're trying to create a barrier, right? So Apple may be able to pay it now. But if they can pay it now and they just say, whatever, we'll pay it, at a certain point, it's going to become something that is not so easy for them to pay, right?
I mean, I think Google had to pay the EU like, I want to say it was like $9 billion fine.
Yeah, but it was downsized to like 2 billion. No, I mean, well, and that was a competition related thing. That was a monopoly related thing, not a data related thing. And I mean, that's still in appeals and everything else. But my only point with this is that there is more visibility at a governance level about data related issues. And as major players where either companies are based or where a large user base is found, change the laws, in a lot of ways, everyone else kind of has to follow suit. So these are some of the main data brokers that are out there. I do not expect you. There will not be some sort of like sneaky question where I'm like, which of the following is not a data broker? That's stupid. But just so we're clear, you should be aware that they exist in some of them. We're going to talk about one of them in just a second. So the question is, who knows you best? Right? Like I might say my best friend who's in Oklahoma, well, San Antonio right now, but I might say her. My brother, yeah, he's pretty good. Maybe a significant other, right? So kind of goes a little different direction. But the actual answer is Axiom knows you best. So, and they do. So here is an Axiom profile that they have on all of us, every last one. And so Axiom is one of the larger data brokers that's out there. So they have your whole browsing history, even your browsing history on incognito mode. Yeah, that didn't stop anything, did it? Online purchases. I mean, incognito mode stopped your mom from knowing what you were browsing. Great. It didn't stop Axiom. They know any public records that exist, right? Even public records that have gone away. Randomly today, I ran into a friend from when I went to school in New Mexico. He is now a professor here in the geology department. And I literally was parking and he's like, Tim from West Hall? And I was like, yeah. Because immediately I was like, there were some things that happened that we don't need to talk about now. It was the past. But Axiom knows. Axiom knows all of those things. Like some DMVs sell your data, right? Loyalty cards, all that's out there. One of the things that was interesting, and this, I haven't seen updated numbers, but this was true 4 years ago, was the Starbucks cards, if they were a bank, would be the 5th largest bank in the world, based on how much money is actively on the entire world Starbucks cards. right? But so think about this, that the whole reason why you have a Starbucks card is, rewards and all these other things and yada, yada, yada. But the fact is that they're getting all of that data. They're getting all your purchase data. They're getting, like, especially with mobile order and pay and all those other things. And they're certainly willing to share it. So on the bottom, there's this one thing that I thought was especially interesting, which is Axiom in 2017 had 3,000 different attributes on 70 million people. Or 700 million, thank you. In 2018, they now had 10,000 categories on 2.5 billion people. Now, one of the things that's really important with categories, and we'll talk about this a little bit with databases, a little bit more with data visualization, but the more and more categories you can collect, the more targeted you can be. So one of the reasons why I think Netflix will be able to compete with Disney Plus, we'll see, but I think they will, is because Netflix has segmented movie classifications or media classifications so broad that they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types of things. Like, it's no longer suspense or horror. It's like suspense, subcategory, 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 subcategory. And what that allows them to do is they can go and say, like, Tim likes these specific things, like very, very targeted, right? The more attributes you're collecting, the more targeted you can be. And so, yeah?
So with Axiom, but they cannot release this data, right?
Yeah, they can.
They can.
Oh, they can do whatever the hell they want.
It's not illegal.
Oh, no, no, no. They can do whatever the hell they want. Yeah, it's the Wild West. This is Wild West, yeah.
So is this like a website, or this is like what most people, like when these politicians are running for office?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was the thing, that the podcast that I was listening to. Oh, yeah. I got a real good one on that. Oh, yeah. 100%. No, you pay them. Yeah. So are you familiar with how credit bureaus work? It's fine if you're not. Like the Equifax and Experian and TransUnion. Okay. So they collect all of our credit-related data, right? But they sell it to banks and other things, and that's how they remain afloat as a business. They also have a subscription service that you can have as a consumer to keep things tracked or whatever else. But effectively, their job is to collect your spending-related data, your credit-related data, your credit history, right? And then they sell it to these different parties, and that's how they run. Data brokers are that, but just on steroids. And so, and the other thing that's crazy as we have more and more of our data out there is that a lot of times data brokers will interlink. Yeah, Carter? Yeah, right? Yeah, right? Well, and the cookies law is actually because of one of the European regulations that happened, I want to say 2 years ago. I'd have to go back and look. But the whole reason why every website now says that is because of how companies use our cookies and because of a law that was passed in the EU. So, but yeah, so the thing is that, so Axiom is one of the biggest data brokers as of at least the start of 2019. But the thing is that a lot of these data brokers will also specialize. So there's like giant data brokers, right, that just collect everything. But then there are some data brokers that are like smaller-ish, and they will collect all of the data on like this piece here, right? But then they will sell the data to Axiom as well as everyone else. And they make Axiom's life easier. So think about Axiom going from 3,000 to 10,000, right? And from 70 million to 2.5 billion, right? So they tripled the number of attributes and they almost quadrupled the number of people. That is a lot more data, right? But they were able to do it because there's so many people that are collecting data. So to your point or question, there are certain pieces of data that cannot be shared, and that has legal ramifications. So for example, student records are protected by FERPA. And so, Yeah, and HIPAA protects medical records and certain other things. So there are certain things that have specific protection. But it is a much smaller group of what is protected than what isn't protected. And so I will tell you right now that there are data brokers that will give out protected data. You can get people's medical records, and that is against the law, right? So that is something that is not necessarily happening for everyone, right? Like not every data broker is literally breaking the law, but certainly all of the data that is not legally protected is out there, right? So yeah, so that is something that you want to be very, very cognizant of. So I bring this picture back up, not to kind of go too in depth or anything, but so think about when we first talked about the information system cycle, right? So you start off with the present, and you're going to, gather some data from transactions and enterprise systems. But now that we know about all of the data that data brokers have, now that we know about all of these other systems, all of that data can be collected or internalized at this point and then stored in your own data system. And once you have it, now you can use it in your analysis and your processing and everything else, right? So what different types of questions can you possibly answer based on that? If you're Amazon and you're trying to target different things, if you know what someone's like credit related issues are, if you know like what's going on in their life or whatever else, now rather than you having to wait for someone to start clicking on baby related stuff, you know that their significant other is pregnant, and you can just start targeting them at things for their kids, right? Or, when I got a dog, they could just start giving me like puppy stuff, right? I mean, I would have bought it. I still do. But so you can be more active, more targeted, the more data you have. So why wouldn't a company want that? I mean, the question is whether they should have it, but that's a different ballgame, right? So this, does anyone know what this is? It's a very kind of interesting picture, interesting term. Who said that? Who said that? You? Yeah. It is a panopticon. I am always surprised when people have like really dope vocab words that they already know. I guess I'm just a big dumbhead. I don't know. Man, people be loving life, I guess. First time for me. Well, I guess first time when I taught the class, whatever. So other than someone who knows what it is, no, I'm just giving you grief. No, I actually very much appreciate it. That is very awesome. But so do people know what a panopticon is? Pardon? So it is a prison. And the kind of premise of it is this idea that because you have this central point where a guard is or isn't monitoring you, but you also have all of the lights outbound. So if you are a prisoner, you cannot see if you are being looked at. You have to assume at any given time that you are being looked at. So if you have to assume that you are being looked at, you have to behave as if you are being looked at, right? So the idea of a panopticon is, and there's actually a lot of interesting studies that showcase this to be true, is you can have a prison set up like this in a circle with that one piece, right? With one guard, maybe two guards. And you can have the entire prison population that's being observed not be causing quote unquote trouble from the perspective of whatever, rather than having to have multiple guards. And it's entirely because people have to act as if they're being watched all the time, right? So this is an interesting psychological study, sure, and concept. But it comes back to this class when you think about that guy right there. So how many people live on the west side or east side? So how many people live like in Beaverton or west? Got not many. I think it's okay, right? It's fine. So we got like 5 people. So there are a couple of different cameras or a couple of different street signs that have cameras, intersections. There are 4 intersections in Beaverton that are no longer passive, meaning if you run a red light, they will record you. They are active in the sense that they are always recording. So why? Why in what way? Do you mean why are they doing it? Or why should they be doing it?
What is their reasoning behind it? Because obviously they can't just be like, what is that camera? They have
Well,
to give it some sort of reason as to why.
Yeah, they didn't. And what they're using it for is they are using it as an impediment for people that are on their cell phone. So if you're on your cell phone while driving, a quote unquote distracted driver, they will send you a ticket in the mail. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the story that was shared was just someone talking about how they and their girlfriend ran a red light. It was videotaped on camera, but they never got a bill in the mail. And so the interesting piece to what you said is that's actually the reason why so many like machine learning related things are talked about now. And that's why so many image related things are interesting now. And because you're right, there is some sort of limit on if you only have one person and you get 10,000 pictures, right? Like there is some sort of amount that they can do, right? And also, I mean, like there's going to be certain things where it's like not every light has the same amount of time from green to yellow to red. And if there's weather conditions, like if it's really rainy or whatever else, like, yeah, I could slam on the brakes, but that actually might be worse. You know, I mean, so like, there's a variety of contextual things, right, that they have to interpret to some degree, right? And so there definitely is a component where it's like, what is the time frame from when it happens to when you actually have the consequence? And perhaps, like you were kind of directionally going, perhaps these just represent an impediment of people being like, I should be good because someone's watching, right? So, and to the point with people being distracted drivers or whatever else, that was something that they started doing last spring in terms of actively recording at 4 places in Beaverton. So I mean, think about the order of magnitude of data that would be created by active recording rather than passive recording. So I have no basis to know like what the turnaround is on the data they're collecting, right? Like, are they even able to interpret it? Are they even able to utilize it? Are people being ticketed or whatever? I have no clue. But so 2 things to really think about with this. One, and I don't know if people love like crime dramas. I love international crime dramas, and Netflix is so great for that. And like Idris Elba was in Luther. That's a great show. And the thing that's interesting is London is one of the most like recorded cities in the world. I think that's not true anymore because there are some cities in China that have surpassed them. But for a long period of time, London had the most cameras per square mile and most cameras per person, like recording you. And so that is one place. The other thing that's really interesting is the Chinese government has actually invested more money in machine learning research than any other company in the world, and they've specifically done it because of the social score that they have started implementing. And so for those of you that don't know, they have like, I think it's like 50 or 60 different things that they're like actively like watching people for, and you get a social score. And that is a government evaluation of how good of a citizen you are. Literally based on what you're like doing. Like you're like walking around in the street or whatever else, like, do you smile in the right way at the right thing? Like that's very, very real. So talking about technology design and the kind of link back to Panopticon, you guys should assume that anything that you do involving anything digital in any way is available for all people. That should be your starting point. I'm not saying that that's good. I would say that it is not good. But I am saying that is where data accessibility is. And we're not even talking about like hacks or whatever else. So you want to be aware that technology has the capacity to, you don't even know you're being surveilled, right? And panoptic power, obviously. It can be corrosive. It also can reduce the work involved in doing something. I can tell you right now that once you get comfortable with like databases and things like that, or getting something from Excel into a database and then vice versa, you can do some stuff that I was doing manually like 10 years ago. Like I can do something now in like 10 minutes that would have taken me a whole week. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So again, it's a tool, right? Technology is like a knife. It's great if you're cutting stuff in kitchen, and it's not so great if someone gets into a fight with you and they have one, right? Like it literally cuts both ways, right? So you could aggregate activities, you can create efficiencies. So this right here is an interesting sort of tracker, which is, this is an image from an HR at a certain company for tracking what you were doing on your work computer. So like you were doing X, you were doing Y, you were doing this is what you were actually using the computer for, whatever else. So it's one of those things where every sort of person, so like this person was spending time browsing arts and entertainment, they were social networking, they were doing games, they were doing shopping. Yeah? You know, that's a really good question. Why isn't working one of those things?
I think it might be like, I don't know, 2%. But
No.
The fact that it's not on there means this is multiple people.
It
Literally, we're not doing
no. This is one person, the reflection of the time one person spent. Well, in the time window that was evaluated. I don't remember. I got this from a HR-related information technology sort of kind of discussion. So I don't remember how long, like was it a week or was it a day or something else? I only say that from a larger scale viewpoint of like this sort of report is available for pretty much every enterprise company. Like if you're using your work computer, they 100% know what you are using it for. Again, going back to the idea of you shouldn't, like if you are doing something with an electrical device, you should assume that someone knows exactly what you were doing and where and how. Yeah? You had a, yeah. Correct. No, I mean, it is a web usage report, but also this is potentially, again, just to go the other direction, this is just how they use the web, right? What if their job is not to use the web at all? Is that not even more indicative of the lack of quote unquote work that is transpiring, right? Yeah?
But they could still be doing their work. I think what some HR offices do is like they're just trying to get this information so they don't calculate the amount of time that you spend on the work.
Yeah.
Because they just want to know like how much time you spend on something.
Oh, totally.
Maybe that might be how they set this up.
Yeah, and also, I mean, like to the point of, you know, is this something that is directly looking at someone's work? There's also a question of productivity, right? Like I podcast all the time, and like my girlfriend will like literally get annoyed with me because I will be like reading an article while listening to a podcast on like ×2 speed, and I'll be having a conversation with her. And she's like, "You're not talking to me." And I'm like, "I am talking to you and I am listening." But like, I am a weirdo. And all I'm saying from that standpoint is if I am productive at my job while like watching random YouTube training videos on Tableau, it is technically entertainment because it is YouTube. And if an HR department was to have a conversation with me, I would be like, cool, go talk to my supervisor and ask what I accomplished that day. Like, but having said that, it's less about is that good or is that bad, how it's used, right? A tool is nothing but a tool, right? And so if they go from the assumption that this means I am not doing my job, that is pretty bad for me. Hopefully, they would at least talk to my manager, maybe have a follow-up conversation, see where things are at, and so on and so forth, before they went the direction of saying, like, I am doing a bad thing, right? But it does depend on how it's used, right? It's nothing more than a report. It's nothing more than an aggregation of time spent categorized. That's all it is, right? And so one major thing to discuss is privacy regulation. So I was talking about kind of that earlier with Vermont, the EU, and things like that. One other thing that's really, really important, and we've talked about it a couple times now, is just the idea that like governance is lagging way behind our technology and data privacy needs. So the legal landscape, a lot of industries have strict guidelines, but technology has gone so far past what the actual governance is that when I say it's the Wild West, I just mean that it's like, it is a free-for-all. There is not a lot of rules that are in place that are clearly communicate the expectations to kind of everyone, right? Businesses, consumers, whatever. International laws are very different than the US. And also talking about like how powerful some of the companies are. Like, do you think if you were like a country in, you know, maybe a not so developed country, do you think you would really pass a law that would make things challenging for Google or for Facebook or for Apple? Like, you would like them to be investing in your country, right? So like these companies have so much power as well. So I say that it's not that we will demand, we are demanding, right? I would say people that are aware of how much of their data is out there and the risk, people want more protection. So also, we talked about this a little bit with Moore's law, but kind of storage costs go down, right? There's more data sources out there. So pretty much it is so easy for companies to collect the data. Think about all the data that's on your phone. Like just your phone. What do you have on your phone? Probably have your banking, right? You may have all of your like email related stuff, probably all your social media related stuff. Between your email and your social media, they can probably get all of your personal information to allow access to any account that you have anywhere other than maybe your social security number. And they probably could get your social security number from some of your banking related stuff with the right sort of communication. I mean, just those three kind of categories, let alone the other stuff that you have, right? So it's like, there is so much data out there, but if there's no protection of it, then, you know, we're at a huge amount of risk. So, and then I think the last piece was just how simple and cost effective it is. So that is that. Obviously, we don't have time to go into detail on this, but that'll be Wednesday. I have one quick question before everyone leaves, and it is an important one. So I actually went to a very interesting workshop today about like diversity and inclusion. And I was thinking about a couple of things in the scope of this class. In the past, this class has had a purely multiple choice final exam. But that does not necessarily support everyone's learning style. And it's not, I mean, so the idea of diversity and inclusion is trying to be supportive of everyone's learning style and actually give a correct evaluation of where people are at. Because that's my job, is teaching and evaluating. So I am open to the idea of having some short answer. I don't want to say short essay because then people think that it's like a page, but like short answer. So like an explanation paragraph, maybe 2, but having a couple of those questions layered in as well as multiple choice. I will leave that up for you guys to consider, and we will have a vote on it on Wednesday. But I want to just communicate to you guys that I'm happy to meet you guys in the middle. Even though it would be substantially more work for me, I want to support you guys as much as I possibly can. I think that's it. Anyways, I'll see you guys on Wednesday.